almost got a double tap here.
All right, we're gonna call this to order.
Yeah.
We're gonna go ahead and read the roll, please. There's no roll. I just asked you that. You're like leading me wrong, Scott. That's right. Okay, we're coming to order. Okay. All right, before we have our recognition of visitors today, I do want to read our statement of meeting visitor guidance. The Mental Health and Recovery Services Board of Lucas County strives to ensure a welcoming and safe environment for all visitors attending a board, committee, or subcommittee meeting. Accordingly, reasonable accommodations will be made for visitors with special needs when provided 24 hours of prior notice. Additionally, each meeting will offer an open session to solicit comments from visitors. Visitors wishing to speak during an open session are requested to identify themselves, the group or agency they represent, if any, and the comment topics. Comments are limited to 3 minutes per speaker. A new issue brought up by a visitor may not be considered by the board, committee, or subcommittee. At the direction of the Mental Health Recovery Services Board or committee chairs, issues brought up by visitors may be forwarded to the executive director for follow-up. Subcommittee chairs may deliver information to their convening committee for consideration. Finally, the chair reserves the right to recognize visitors during other parts of the board, committee, or subcommittee proceedings if they believe the visitor's comments would be pertinent to the motion or business being considered. All additional conversations by visitors during meeting proceedings are discouraged. Visitors that disrupt board, committee, or subcommittee meetings may be asked to leave. Okay, with that, recognition of visitors.
Paul Lewis, Recovery Council, and St. Paul Community Center Board of Trustees.
Lynette here, Neighborhood Properties. Richard Arnold.
Albertina Parra.
Linda Parra from Nuestra Gente.
Linda Alvarado Arce.
Carl.
Oh, Carl.
Maya Francisco, intern at your health center.
Okay. Thank you. Welcome everyone today. Okay, so the next, the first item then on our agenda, or the next one here, this is to approve this, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's for motion to approve.
Okay, so need a motion to approve our committee meeting from May 10th.
So moved. Second.
Okay. Any questions? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any against? Those abstaining? Okay, the motion passes. All right, number 4, the treasurer's report, Jenny.
I'm going to start on page 4 for the April treasurer's report. Like I normally do, I'm going to run down some of our variances for April. Again, like we've been talking about, the largest variance in the revenue section is the federal revenue, and that's mostly due to our SOAR grant. We are catching up quite a bit with expenses, so we're going to be underspent a little, but not as much as we originally thought. Most of this is timing. So we requested $720,000 in April, and it actually came in May. So we're appearing underspent there, but we're not actually that underspent. We're appearing as though we're under in revenue, but we're not actually that far under in revenue. And then on the expenses side, I'm going to go to the largest percentage variances, which of course continue to be the purchase of service, which we've been talking about all year, and we did right-size that for fiscal year 23. At the end of fiscal year 22, we are expecting that to be underspent by about $400,000 when we end up at the end of the year. On the pass-through program expenses, the variance there is at 78%. We're likely not going to have significant underspending there, so that is predominantly timing of when we think the agencies are going to spend the money and request the funds and when it actually happens. April was pretty non-eventful, as far as our normal months go, and we had a decrease in net assets of $284,000. Overall, when we get to the end of our fiscal year, we're making some of those projections right now, we are expecting to be under budget by about $1.5 million across the various categories. So the purchase of service, like I mentioned, is gonna be about $400,000 underspent. We're gonna have some other grant-funded underspending that we normally assume our agencies are going to underspend. And we, like I mentioned last month, do anticipate some underspending in our admin expenses as well. And then I'm gonna jump to the balance sheet on page 5. Like I said, April was pretty non-eventful. As far as ins and outs, most of the change happened in cash. So we got about $1 million in levy revenue. We got our fourth quarter allocations from Ohio Moss, and then that was offset by our April payments, and we had a decrease in cash of $246,000. And we are ending on April 30th, our non-designated board fund balance is $20.4 million. The payments for the month are on pages 6 and 7, and there's a motion on page 3. I should add, because of the timing of our meetings, the next financial statement that you get should be year-end, fiscal year 22 year-end financials.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any questions? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? Those abstaining? All right, the motion passes. Next one, Jenny.
The next one is on page 8. This is an increased allocation request for Family and Child Abuse Prevention Center. So I just mentioned to you that our POS, our treatment, is, we're anticipating to be underspent there by quite a bit, about $400,000 for the year. Most of our agencies are tracking to be underspent, but we do have one agency that is requesting additional funds because they have spent all of their allocations so far. And that is Family and Child Abuse Prevention Center. If you're not familiar with them, we do have a paragraph in there of how they use the funds and why they're seeing such higher numbers than they were before. They work with a lot of domestic violence, which we've seen an increase in due to COVID. They also noted that they've had a lot more flexibility with telehealth, so they've been able to see a lot more people. And they have seen a lot of, they do a lot of gap funding and people that are switching jobs. So, you know, they may have a month here or there between insurance, and then the board covers that when there are no other pay sources. So we currently have their allocation for fiscal year 22 at $41,717. We have claims of just about $5,500 that they have submitted. They have gone through our entire GOSH process, and we are just simply holding because we can't pay because they've exceeded their allocation. And they are anticipating about another $2,000 worth of claims through the end of June. So this would be fiscal year 22 claims. So they are requesting $7,500 additional to their allocation, which would bring it to $49,217 for the year. And I should note that when you approved the purchasing plan last month, and we talked about the fiscal year 23 allocations, we saw the trend. We saw that the trend was increasing.
Okay.
And we actually approved $60,000 as their fiscal year 23 allocation. So we anticipated this, we knew that the request would be coming, and here it is. And I can answer questions, and there's a motion on page 8.
Second.
Okay, any other questions? Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? Those abstaining? All right, motion passes. Great, number 16.
Good afternoon. This is the, I think I said last time that was the last part of the purchasing plan, but really this is the close of the purchasing process, sort of. Annually, this is the time of year where we come to you and have the board redesignate two types of entities. There are the pre-screeners, and then there are the attorneys. And for pre-screeners, there are two motions there. These are the individuals or entities that will complete evaluations for voluntary and involuntary admissions. That would be your first set of motions. And then the second set of motions are the attorneys who represent the board in the hearings for involuntary commitments. Carla Davis has done this for, I don't know, decades. And Chelsea Meister has been doing this for the past several years. One of the individuals, Jeffrey Montville, is retiring, so he won't be taking it on. But Carla Davis and Chelsea Meister have expressed interest in continuing to take on that work. So if you have any questions, you can answer them.
Jude, has there been any complaints against any of these entities? Or the?
When you say complaints, can you be more specific?
Are there any? Do we have any reason not to approve?
For the first set of motions or the two attorneys?
For any of them?
Any? Well, for the first set of motions, I don't know that I can answer that regarding any complaints.
We have no complaints related to the involuntary commitment process or the pre-screening process related to the involuntary.
So I guess that is a really broad question because they do a lot of stuff.
They do, yeah.
So in relation to the pre-screening and commitment?
Yeah.
Okay.
And in terms of the two attorneys, we have not, I have not, I don't know if Scott, you've heard of.
I don't think complaint is the right term in relation to the attorneys. The attorneys perform a service for the community during an involuntary commitment process. They are not the defendant's attorneys. They are the community's attorneys. So they present the evidence as to why an involuntary commitment should take place.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Will we replace the third gentleman that's retiring, Montville?
Not so far as I know. They didn't offer an additional person, and I believe Carla Davis used to do this on her own for
Okay.
quite some time.
I
And
believe
only within the past few years added additional folks.
Yeah, Ms. Davis has done this for nearly, I think, over 30
30
years,
years.
and she does it for 20-some county region. They're not using their current, the amount of their current contract now. Several years ago, Candy worked with them to get some succession planning going, and so that's what we're seeing.
Do you want the motion divided up, or you want one motion with both topics?
You can do either, but I think there might be a couple of conflicts on the first motion, so let's take them, well, I'd suggest we take them separately.
Okay, so I move for the period of July 1, 2022, so that first council motion.
For the
For the first
involuntary
motion,
commitment
yes,
process,
yes, please.
or designating the pre-screeners.
Second.
Any other questions on that? All right, those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? Those abstaining?
Aye.
That's such one, I need to abstain as well.
On the second motion, is there, for a second,
So moved.
Second.
Second, okay. Any questions on the second part of this? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any against? Any abstaining? All right. Motion passed.
I have the next one. Okay, can I draw your attention to page 10? We're talking about the owner's representative contract approval for what we've been calling the adult psychiatric rehabilitation facility. I believe I mentioned to you several months ago that it is now time to get some additional professional help related to the development of our adult psych rehab facility. Subsequently, we released an RFP and received 4 responses. A committee was put together, a scoring committee was put together using NAMI Ohio, who's been involved in this project since the beginning, myself, Sally Lucan, who's our consultant, and Mr. David Arnold, our trustee. We scored the 4 projects, we met as a group, we identified questions for the 2 highest scoring folks, sent them questions, they responded, then we held in-person interviews last Friday with both of those groups, and came out of that group, or came out of that meeting with a recommendation to enter into a contract with an entity called Hyplex Solutions. They are out of Powell, Ohio. They provided, they were the highest scorer in our proposal. They also were and gave us, as far as the 2 that we interviewed, the 2 highest, they were $200,000 less than the second proposal that we were considering. They've done work in Toledo and Lucas County. Most recently, they did the McLaren Toledo Clinic Cancer Center out there on Maumee and Ford, I think, or Ford and
The trail.
Yeah.
the trail. They did a nice job on their proposal, and I am gonna stop there and defer to David if he wants to add anything.
No, I think you summarized it accurately. I mean, both groups were qualified, and both groups, both bidders, if you will, I think could have done the job. These folks are very professional. They have a wealth of experience, including a recent experience with a facility in Dayton that's very similar to what we're doing. One of the things we had to look very carefully at is the similarity, and the other group did a lot of government contracting for the Coast Guard and for the Customs and Border Patrol folks, big government contracts, which I think is one of the reasons their bid was so high, because they're just used to padding it and building in things. So anyway, I think Scott summarized the process very well. I think it was a rigorous process and a fair process, and I think it's the right result. I guess my only other comment is, for some reason, Scott keeps calling them Hyplex, and their name is actually Hplex. So we need to, well, we need to make sure that
Did I write it that way?
Yeah, you did. Both resolutions are wrong.
Well, I stand corrected. Thank you, David.
Well, I had to look it up myself
I've
just
been
to
saying
make
that
extra.
since the beginning.
Oh, all day long, yeah.
He's like you.
Well, it's right in the narrative.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's fine.
Yeah.
yeah, as long as the motions are correct, it will be good.
Okay, so there is a second part to the motion. Thank you for that. I'm feeling a little red.
Oh, you're amongst friends,
So
don't
the,
worry.
and the 3,000 people at home.
Yeah.
So
They're your friend too.
the second part of this is that there are some direct services to site preparation and environmentals that aren't covered in the Hyplex bid, that weren't covered in any of the bids, that we need approval for so that we can move this project forward. I talked to our consultant today, Ms. Lucan. She is working diligently on responding to the federal application for the $2 million. And there is a very tight timeline that the feds have now imposed on us, July 7th.
Oh,
It frankly is likely impossible that we will be able to meet that deadline. To have a lease in place, have environmentals done, have architectural rendering, drawing, more so than, we don't need the engineering and architectural yet. But we believe that this has been, first of all, you should know that we've asked for an extension. But but we believe the feds want to see some due diligence on our end. The OR is a good place, moving the lease along as fast as possible and getting some initial environmentals done on the site will be a good show to say, hey, we're just not sitting around, biding time. We really need to move this forward. So the second motion is a request for you to allocate up to $30,000 of the designated funds. Remember, you've already designated the 500 and we have it sitting aside. So the 275 for H-Plex and the 30,000 for the other environmentals would come out of those designated funds. And so I also just want to let you know that even when you approve this, it still isn't final until June 21st, right? And at that point, we may have additional information from the feds, and I may need to come in with some additional requests based on whatever they decide. So you may have a walk-on to the agenda on June 21st related to this. Or if necessary, I may need to have a virtual meeting, special virtual meeting for whatever they need, the feds need, prior to June 30th. And a virtual meeting can be done on June 30th, but it cannot be done on July 1st because that law expires, that temporary law expires, and we will no longer be able to do virtual board meetings as of July 1. So I'm just letting you know that up front. We are recommending the approved motion for H-Plex at $275,000 and then 30,000 in miscellaneous funds from the designated for miscellaneous vendors, and we can't even tell you who those vendors are at this point.
So, Scott, what happens if they fail to grant us our extension?
We work like H to
H
do
Plex.
whatever we can do to get it done, and of course, we ask Representative Congresswoman Capter to advocate for us, since this is a congressional allocation.
So are these motions contingent upon either us meeting a deadline of the July deadline or obtaining an extension and receiving the funds ultimately?
It
or-
cannot be, we can't do that, because I can't have a contingency on the 2 million when I need H-Plex today.
Okay.
So some of the work that they will do, H-Plex will do, if the first site doesn't work out, will be portable to whatever next site we choose. And we don't have an alternative site, so let's just be clear on that. Any environmentals that we do on that site or testing, they're gone. And that's just the risk we have to take for this project. Also, the 2 million is on top of the 500 that you've already allocated. And of course, because this project has been named our second priority in the Ohio Mass capital planning process, it is in line for an additional $750,000. Now, we're gonna request more. Even then, we think we'll need another 3 million minimum. So we're not,
From the board,
no,
from
private fundraising,
Other sources.
other sources, and that's being optimistic. I mean, we think it might come in more, but we don't know. That's why we need H-Plex to help us with the development of the budget.
But
So
it may
this
be
is some
helpful,
cost.
Nima, to know that the H-Plex contract, the way they bid it is actually broken down, so that the first phase of getting the environmental done and the survey and all of that is only $45,000, that's $45,000 for H-Plex. So it's not like we don't have an escape clause if we don't go forward. We
Okay.
haven't committed the whole 270.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
really all I wanna know. Is
Yeah.
there something
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
there will be an
happens
escape
over
clause
here.
in the contract with them
22,
anyway.
25.
So if we get up to some point and we can't, but the 45 is phase one. And then phase two is up to 2.25, which is 270, and then we added 5,000 for their direct cost, travel and, you know, things like that, just something as a placeholder. So that's how we got to the
Okay.
275.
Thank you.
All right, is there a motion to approve?
Yes, so much.
Second.
And that's for both.
That's for
Yes.
both, taking both. Okay, any other questions? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? Those abstaining? Okay, motion passes. Number 8, Scott.
Okay, next one's mine as well. So what we're doing here is we're drawing the conclusion of our fiscal year 22 120-day notice process. As you recall, we had the marathon meeting on May 10th. 2 hours and 39 minutes. If you want to go to our YouTube channel and review everything that was stated. It did have over, I think, 120 views, so it was viewed, and obviously it was well attended here as well. As you recall, after careful consideration and a lot of dialogue, you took 2 actions. The first was to allocate what we believed we owed them in relation to services rendered prior to February 13th or 17th, whatever day they ceased operations, and that total amount was $21,400. And then the second motion was to suspend the decision related to the fiscal year 23 contract until June 21st, with an understanding that Adelante documents changes in their administration, board governance, which assures this board that Adelante is able to provide services in accordance with requirements of the agency agreement, and that assurances for financial improprieties have been resolved, those responsible are held accountable, and additional fiscal oversight has been put in place. So on May 10th, I confirmed those discussions with Mr. Briones in writing, provided him information on when we needed the plan, so that staff had time to vet it in time for this meeting and ask any additional questions. That was confirmed that was going to happen on May 25th. I met with representatives of their ad hoc committee. Actually, I believe Amy and I met with representatives of the ad hoc committee, where they had suggested that they delay their presentation to this board and submission of the plan. After having some conversations with them, I feel that it is most appropriate that we would recommend the delay of their presentation. They have a good base of where they want to head, but if they would have presented today, we would have had a lot more conversation and information needed about programs and services that simply was not the focus of their thinking at that time. They were focusing on administration and, you know, some of the assurances related to the fiscal oversight and some of the other things that we requested, but there needs to be a lot more discussion about programmatic. I wouldn't even been able to identify for you what we could purchase, given they weren't there yet. The process that they described to me, I think, is the process that we had hoped and envisioned. The ad hoc committee is doing their due diligence. They are inviting and have involved other people in the community, and there's conversations evolving. I don't want to talk about what their planning is now. It's really their plan to present. However, we do have an administrative due process issue that needed to be resolved. It was the 120-day notice contractual language that needed to be resolved. So when they asked for the delay, I asked them that in order for us to consider that, they would have to voluntarily withdraw their appeal to our recommended motion that we not fund them or not renew their fiscal year 22 contract. Because our requirement was, or our statutory requirements define us, put a defined time limit on our decision. It was voluntarily delayed, the first part, but we really need to make that decision before the end of June. So they voluntarily, in writing, submitted a request to withdraw their appeal of the board staff's recommendation that this board not renew the fiscal year 22 contract for the reasons cited in the motion. If you recall, that was the original motion that was submitted to you on May 10th. It was also our understanding that they would come back to us in August with their plan and present at that point in time for consideration of a new fiscal year 23 contract for whatever time period they might suggest. Obviously, that is up to you all. It's always been up to you all to consider. But I think the extra time over the month will help over July, and obviously through June and July, will give them the time they need to come back to us and say, this is the vision, and give us a timetable for enacting that vision.
I'm assuming that in that period of time, that they will have an opportunity to discuss some ideas in going forward with the staff.
So we are always open to those communications. They reached out to us first to talk about, to have the conversation on May 25th. We're always open. I've offered and left that on the table. If you need to talk to us about programming and how and what and why, just give me a call and we'll make that happen.
So that on August the 30th, when they do present, it will not be totally unfamiliar and hopefully much smoother.
We would hope that their presentation, well, let me say it this way. I don't think this board wants to get into another conversation like we did on May 10th, right?
Mm-hmm.
The May 10th conversation is the reason why we started the meeting out the way we did. So yeah, we will have much more defined, much more concrete conversations about what they're proposing as far as a transition plan, what that plan looks like, and what services they're requesting, and amounts. That would be the goal. Otherwise, I don't know how we approve a contract not knowing amounts and services.
In the meantime, the community are void of the services that Almonte was providing, correct?
I would say that is accurate. I don't know for sure, but I would say that is accurate.
So if they're withdrawing their appeal and they're gonna come to us with a new plan, does that open up the door for anyone else who would wanna provide those services?
That is entirely up to you.
Okay.
I just,
By you, he means all of us, by the way.
no, you said
It's
it.
on you. It's all you.
It's like all of a sudden everybody was looking at me and I'm like,
We all looked at her like,
I should not have personalized it, although you are the chair, so.
I would just, with
I'm not in
the
this
time
alone.
frame, it feels like it's gonna take a little longer than anticipated, and just from experience of what I know about our community, especially that community, there's a void of services that's impacting, an example, like Escuela Smart, and they're starting again in August, and so that's concerning to me. That's concerning.
Well, Ms. Alvarado Arce is actually in the room, and I believe she's the chair of the,
And president of ALIS,
yeah.
which is an advocacy and support group for Escuela Smart, our only bilingual school that's part of Toledo Public School here in Toledo, and in our old historic South End. And yes, the interruption of services, as I mentioned at the last board meeting, it made a huge impact on our parents. They had to scramble and look for after school We have mental health navigators, so we weren't getting the services of people over there. We had to ask Tackle in the school to try to pick up more. We had to ask Tutor Smart to come and pick up more. You know, I don't know about when the services ended, when they weren't. That was all fuzzy during this whole time as well to even know. But we are starting school. We have summer school going. We need services. We need to partner with other mental health agencies. We need to still look at where all our Latinos are in our city, throughout the whole city, and maybe reinvent something and re-look at this. But it's hard to provide services if you don't know what services or where the people are. And we need to know that. And so there has to be a new way of looking at this, because what happened left our parents high and dry. And we have had to scramble. And so now I am calling community leaders and members together. How can we make sure that this doesn't happen again? Even if they do restart, to me, this analogy is restarting this junk car. Even if you do try to jumpstart this junk car, we could have brand new, something sparkling new, think outside the box. We, as the board, should know about what enabling is, and we need to quit enabling. And we've had these conversations, even when I sit on the board, when other agencies come up, or even when Adelante has come up before. We've talked about their audits being late in services and things. So this isn't new, but we need to look as the board. You are the leaders. We're looking at you in the community. You have the money. We're looking at you to help us. Help us help our people. But you can't keep doing it if you just continue to enable groups that aren't providing excellent service to our people. Okay? Nice deal.
But the organization have to.
That's true.
Right?
Can we put an
That was my
RFP out?
question.
I think, I have two questions on the table.
Okay, go with
Alright,
Nemus
so-
first, you can do me
So
second.
organizations have to come to us. It's helpful to know what organizations want, so it's not always that they have to come to us.
Right.
My opinion on this is that we asked Adelante and the ad hoc committee to do something. I think we should honestly respect that. Until they come to us and say, this is what we're doing, because we don't know what they're doing right now. We have a good idea, I have a good idea of where they're heading, and I think it's what this board envisioned. But until they come sit in the table and present, and you hear it for yourselves, then I think this is me, and this is my recommendation, it's bad faith to ask them to do something, and then turn around and do something different.
Even though those they serve are paying the price.
So that is you asked them to do something in June. They weren't doing services for February, March, April, May, June. We knew that we weren't gonna have anything in July or August because school isn't there.
But we
Yeah,
asked them to do something in May to give it to us.
Yeah.
Indeed you did.
And we didn't know it was an option to look for alternative services.
Well, I mean,
It's always.
it wasn't at that time because you can't,
Right.
you have a contractual obligation to due process.
Yeah, fair enough.
That gets resolved with this motion.
So what happens then in August, or say the end of July, they realize we need more time because we want to make sure we give you the best thing, and then they say October, then what? I mean, when does it stop? I mean, is there any parameters on how long they can keep saying we want to give you something good to give you more time? So
But we
that's
can
my.
say no today.
You could
Right, but
say,
we already say to this one.
But we are saying.
Oh, well, yeah, to the.
Yeah,
It's
let's-
all a brand new
so
situation,
Don't we
correct?
have to approve the extension?
this is not an
Extension,
extension.
it's a.
This is a
done.
terminate, this is a
But don't we have-
decision.
Yes, I said this is to terminate.
Everything else after this is different.
It's-
It's brand new.
It's brand new.
Brand new, starting from
Now,
square
now
one.
I will just say, from my standpoint, I'm not sure, well, I don't wanna make assumptions, but my sense is that if there was a chance that you are going to decide to RFP their services differently, they would have likely come here today and put a presentation together, whatever that looked like.
Yeah, but we didn't know about the summer school and all this.
To presume
Well-
that we're going to.
Well,
Because we
remember,
expected a presentation today.
well,
I didn't find out on Friday when I read this, or over the weekend.
The one thing I want to be very careful about is that we don't create any false expectations on any agency's part that we are going to approve and contract. You know, I understand there's a need, but I just don't want any false expectations by delaying things or whatever. I mean, I think what I felt like I was agreeing to is that we would pay for services that had been rendered, and I understood that they were coming to us, asking us to be willing to listen to them and to not make a definitive decision at the May meeting and to delay our decision until June the 21st.
correct.
And that's all that I understood.
And with their services, so they're gonna present a plan on August 2nd, but we don't know when they might start providing services. You know, I was a student for most of my life, and I know what it's like to be starting off behind the, whatever. So my concern is having to start the school year and not having services in place. You know, and that's just one example of the breadth of services that they will provide.
So let's remember, all Adelante provided for Escuela was prevention services that we funded, all right? So, the services that are, if you're referencing mental health navigator services, substance use, mental health treatment service, we did not fund that service.
Okay.
Okay, so we're talking about prevention services that we fund. I also feel compelled to say, this was a conversation between the representatives of the ad hoc committee and the board's executive director. There was no surprises to me on what they were suggesting. I also was clear on what you voted for. You were voting for what you believed you owed them, and no promises were made beyond that. All right? So I think they are understanding of that as well.
Everybody understands, including our community and the public.
So it's up to us.
We are where
Yeah.
we are where we are.
Right, but I do want you to know something. Just so you're aware, you don't approve this motion, you do enter into a contract with them for fiscal year '23 at the same rate.
I move the,
All right? So let's be clear on that.
You should have said that. You should have started with that. No, I'm joking.
That's why I said, we are where we are.
Right, yeah.
Well, I appreciate I respect your integrity that you want to respect them. And but I feel like two things can happen at once. We can continue to honor our contract with them and continue this process with them, but also continue to do something about these people who are not receiving services now. Like, I feel strongly about, I think that's so important right now,
Yeah.
especially with these families who most of them, Adelante was providing something that, in a bilingual manner, that they can't really get anywhere else. This is what's been communicated to me. I don't know the entire list of things, but the list seemed a little more extensive the last conversation I had with the school, than what so I don't know where, I feel like there's like a.
Well, I'm talking about what we fund.
Right.
What we fund.
Yeah,
We fund 2 programs.
And can I say something?
So let's be
Okay.
clear, 2 programs, 161,000 or 2 prevention programs, and then another 10,000 for suicide awareness activities. Beyond that, we have no relationship with Escuela or Adelante beyond that. So let's be clear about that.
Okay.
Now, if the board is saying, we want to fill the gap, that's a different conversation.
It has nothing to do with this motion. This
Right,
motion
right.
was approved in all of it.
Right.
So I second your motion.
Or the existing contract
Correct.
that we have.
Once this motion is approved, the contract is on June 21st, is gone.
Correct.
Got it.
An existing contract for prevention services for 2 programs.
Will not be
3.
renewed.
Will not be
2
renewed.
prevention programs and the
2
suicide.
prevention programs and suicide, correct, correct.
And the BH Navigator, sorry. 4 programs.
Can you clarify what programs are?
The BH Navigator, suicide awareness, Buena Vida, and, so it isn't 3. But only 2 of those, only one of those was at Escuela.
So all those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? Those abstaining?
All right, so I need the next
So that
question.
motion
I'm sorry.
No, just making sure it's passed.
So now I need to ask the next question. How would you like me to proceed? There was a conversation about filling gaps.
You said they have to, an organization has to come to us as opposed to an
That's-
RFP being,
We can RFP, but what would you RFP? Adelante's prevention services, I mean,
And for what period of time? 2 months?
and what's the need? There was a conversation at the last meeting about they were doing an evaluation of community
right?
need.
And is, like, she said that tackle's stepping in right now as a temporary Band-Aid. And what's tackle providing?
Can we ask for a recommendation from
But providing services that we don't pay for.
I would say that this is not the appropriate venue to ask those recommendations.
Okay, that's what I want to know.
But you're free to do whatever you.
No, I think at this point, what we need to do, it just seems like, a lot of, clarity happened this afternoon, which is exciting, because once things clear out, we understand that with Adelante, that, you know, just to kind of be a little bit focused here, provided 2 services. We funded 2 services through them for $161,000. I think what's happening is we're looking at that and saying, okay, how do we get these services up and running in time for the new school year? That's our concern as a board. But also floating around in everybody's brain, on the other side of that, separate, nothing to do with this, is this the right time for us to circle around and find out what that community really needs?
Yes.
And what Scott is saying is that Adelante is doing that as part of their restructuring or their reinventing what they're doing. They're having conversations in the community and looking into that. Now, if we as a board want to take that on, that's a separate thing that has really nothing to do with the programming that we fund with.
So it's a separate entity?
Well, no, one doesn't have anything to do with the other. So if we as a board decide we want to do a survey in the Latino community to see what services are missing or what we could be doing more of, whatever, that's separate. And that's something, and it's a separate conversation.
And just a dose of reality, that still would be done by August.
Yeah. Right.
No way.
You know, so I think that's what's happened, is that we're looking at this and we're going, like, all these thoughts are coming into our mind, and I could be mistaken. But I know for me, I get excited when I think of, oh, wow, we want to provide the best services possible to our community. That's why we're all sitting in this room, right? So maybe what we need to do is, you know, sit back and say, all right, do we wanna do a analysis? Do we wanna hire a consultant? How do we want to pursue that and give that thought? But that's a separate conversation from the services we purchase from our.
They have their hands up first.
Oh, I was just gonna say, so when you said that, you know, the agency or the school would have to ask, so could the school?
I never said that.
Oh, well, I'm just throwing it out there, what if the school came, if Escuela Smart came to the board and said, will you help us fill these services, is that something we can do?
Sure. But they have to be open to the fact that it could be Adelante doing it. If they're coming to us and asking us to do X, Y, and Z, obviously we want to work with the community. But we have a Latino community that has come to us and said, we want to present you a plan.
Right, but what I'm saying though is they're saying they have summer school this summer, Atalante's not coming back to us till August, well, that's what I'm saying, that they
So
come
they
now.
wouldn't have, no, I don't want to say that because I won't know. But my sense is they didn't provide that service in the summer, but I don't know for sure.
Yeah, we have to remember the services that we fund through Adelante. And Scott, what are they again in their purpose?
Prevention, it's the Buena Vida program, the Behavioral Health Navigator program, which I think, which I know is outside of school-based, and the suicide prevention program directly related to the Latino community is outside of school district.
So we didn't provide tutoring services, we didn't provide, okay.
Counseling
so that's-
services, we didn't provide any of that.
Any of that?
Correct.
That's not what we funded.
Nope.
So if somebody would want those services, that, again, they have to, that's where they would put together a plan and approach the board.
I think one of the areas of confusion, at least for me, until hearing the conversation today, is that Adelante came to us essentially asking us not to, or to continue funding them, and they'll close if we don't. So although it may only be 2 or 3 programs, if our funding is so essential to their operations, then it makes it seem larger than just 2 or 3 programs.
Right, it does.
And so
That's why
I think
we-
that's
I
part of
asked-
the reason why the,
Yeah, absolutely, yeah, absolutely. The
Well,
confusion.
and-
That's why I wanted to clarify, like, wait a minute, we're talking about $161,000 that funds 2 very specific programs.
It's 171,
Oh, 171, I'm sorry,
3
and 3 programs. I was off by all the numbers.
well, you weren't off.
And Escuela Smart is only one school. They have the opportunity to go to Queen of Apostle or any of the other charter schools too. We're not the only school in Toledo.
I appreciate the need in our Latino community, and I don't mistake anything I'm saying to diminish that. But we should treat this the same way we treat fulfilling any need in this community. And there are tons of needs that we are aware of.
True.
And so we need to not set a precedent, in my opinion, that is different than the way we approach any other need that this board has funds and seeks to fulfill. We shouldn't be doing surveys if we're not routinely doing surveys. We shouldn't be inviting people to come to us if that's not typically what we do. We should step back, we appreciate the need and the urgency and the importance, and we are here to fulfill a need, but we should not be setting precedent by doing one approach for one
Entity.
entity or situation and handle it the same way we handle anything else. This is a process. We have ended that appeal, the 340, and so we need to move to, in my opinion, on to the next agenda item and let it happen the way it should happen in the ordinary course of things. But that's just my vote.
So I think we've done that, correct?
Well, it depends. I mean, we're still talking about doing other things and surveys and fulfilling needs.
That's not our job.
I vote with you, let's move on.
Well, I get the privilege of taking over from that conversation on page 12, which isn't honestly too dissimilar from where we were. This is the discussion about the next phase of, or the next iteration of your strategic plan. And for those who were here, what year is it? I think we were in this position about 3 years ago, 2 years ago. We were RFPing for it, and we had so much work that was done up to the point of March 2020, when we were gonna meet in person to review all of the results that had been done with our consultant to create a 3 to 5 year plan. And you know how that played out. So what we opted for, what the board opted for at that time, was to have us do something that was much more scoped, that was specific to the pandemic, as well as after the killing of George Floyd, the racism being declared a public health issue in Lucas County, the board resolution here in June of 2020. There was so much around that was our focus, as well as crisis services and our data strategy. So that's what we've been focusing on for the last 18 months, and we figured that after we came to that close, we would be deciding, this board would be deciding what we would do thereafter. So here we are today. The 18 months is about us, and so it is for you all to consider if you would like to RFP for a new consultant to do your next strategic plan. And Ms. Friedman, I don't know if there's anything that you would want to say about strategic planning in general, or any vision for that.
Absolutely. I think that it would be timely for us to do it, for us to take a look at how the needs into the future. We were having a conversation earlier, children, think about every 3-year-old today has spent 2 years of their lives dealing with COVID, so I think that it would be timely to do it. I'm all in favor of strategic plans. I believe you need a roadmap to where you want to go, and you can always change the roadmap, as we did in March of 2020. But it's vital to have a map to know when you're going off of it, and then creating a new map, and having a vision. And I'm sure that many of you have, in your own lives, built strategic plans and had to change them several times and whatnot, but to get back on track and to really look at what's going on in our community and what the needs of our community will be into the future is something, and where we want to go as a board, and how we want to change our, what is it that we want and envision for the community as well. So that's my spiel. Jim?
We've consistently done that. We have consistently held ourselves accountable for doing that. And only in reference to what happened relative to the pandemic did we have to kind of change course a little bit. I see no reason why we wouldn't go back to doing what we have consistently done and what we've expected of ourselves, which is to look into the future for a longer period of time and to hold ourselves accountable for that.
So is there a motion to approve? Would it be fair to say that restarting or continuing on with what we do about strategic planning, since we had to pivot from the plan that was all set to go into place, that plan, for example, the consideration of racism as a public health issue is not gonna just fall off the table and we're starting all anew.
Yeah, I would say that would be silly to do that. And typically, the way that the plans work are, there's some kind of update that you would see, where did we land with the plan? And then you take that data and you develop strategies for what you might like to do going forward. And with a good consultant, you should get a lot of community feedback, staff feedback, board feedback that evaluates that work that was done. So it shouldn't be from scratch, and I think you should definitely use the 18-month plan because it did have objectives to be met.
And just as a reminder as well, our equity and action plan stands alone as well.
Correct.
Thank you.
Second.
All right, any other questions? All right, all those in favor? Those against? Those abstaining? All right, the motion passes. All right, number 10, Michael.
Shifting gears will be pretty quick. In 2018, we had our RFP out for services to increase our marketing and communication into underserved populations, specialized populations, and that went really well. Creo won the contract. We are looking to continue that contract with Creo and their services for the exact same amount that the previous contract was for, which was $76,000 for professional advertising, marketing services, and to continue to reach those specifically historically underserved populations. And so there is a motion at the middle of page 13. Answer any questions if you have it.
So moved. Second.
Any other questions? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? Those abstaining? Okay, the motion passes. All right, number 11, Amy.
Hi everyone, I am on the second half of the page, on page 13, the Center of Hope Suicide Prevention Campaign. As you may recall, back in October of 21, the board approved a countywide suicide prevention campaign that was funded through Crisis Flex funds, which come to us through the Ohio Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services. And this campaign was a collaborative effort between multiple certified prevention agencies within our system of care with the purpose of raising awareness of the public health problems related to suicide. At this time, we're coming to ask for the addition of the Center of Hope Agency to broaden the campaign's reach for the suicide prevention campaign. They are a certified agency which we began working with contractually last fiscal year, this fiscal year actually. So the Center of Hope strategy would be to provide parent education, and their target population will be parents and caregivers of African American and Latino children. So at this time, we're asking for an allocation amount of $10,395, which is subject to change should our funding amount through Ohio Mass, the allocation amount change. There is a motion at the bottom of page 13 to reflect that, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
So moved.
Second.
Any other questions? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? Those abstaining? All right, the motion passes. All right, number 12, Jenny.
I'm gonna be on page 14. So you might recall back in March, we did a stakeholder forum and we asked the community members, our contracted agencies, and everyone that has anything to do with our board to provide feedback to us about things that were working, things that weren't, questions, concerns they had. One of the biggest issues that was noted out of that was staffing issues. Costs increasing due to inflation. We know that inflation is, 8% now? Our agencies are being held to a certain standard that we have set for our programs, and they're feeling a crunch because the costs are increasing, they don't have the staffing to be able to meet the needs, but we're still holding them accountable to that. And we offer a 2% increase if they're meeting their outcomes each year for the program, but it's not enough to meet the needs. We're hearing this, we heard it as part of the stakeholder forum, we have it in conversations with our agencies. We are recommending, therefore, to have an additional allocation in fiscal year 23 to our contracted agencies for the purposes of helping with recruitment, helping with retention, helping with just general increased costs. And the agencies then would be permitted to use the funds in a different way than we would normally allow them to. Normally, it's strictly programmatic, so the expenses have to be tied to the program. So if you're not doing the program, or you don't have staff, and you're not incurring those expenses, then you can't request reimbursement for us for the expenses. This would just be, here's an additional extra to help. We know we can't solve the problem. We know we're not gonna be able to help them solve their staffing issues. But we also know that we are anticipating underspending in fiscal year '22, so we have the ability to help our agencies, and that's what we are attempting to do. And I have a chart on page 15 of the amounts. So the first column there is what you approved last month for their fiscal year '23 allocations. Just to note that this is just the agency agreement allocation, so it does not include SOAR, it does not include pass-through, it does not include Ohio Moth only funds. It's just what was the first section that you approved, and it's just in their agency agreement. And then based on that, we used some formulas and came up with some proposed additional allocations to each of the agencies. So these funds would be one-time only to be used in fiscal year '23, and our hope is that we can help in some way with the increase in costs. I mean, we know what the gas prices are today. We know what that's doing to us personally. We're seeing it with our agencies. And I have a motion on page 14.
And the money would be distributed based upon this formula?
Yes.
To everyone?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I understand why we're not putting, a lot of restrictions around the money, but do we have any assurances that, and I'm not gonna be able to give you an example, but let's say we have the programming that an entity is doing for us is very specific. So, and we're giving them, tens of thousands of dollars, that they don't utilize those funds to support another organization, board's programming that does not benefit the programming that we're sponsoring. Does my question make sense?
Yes.
It does.
Because I don't understand that that's really the spirit for which we are giving these funds, or that they put the money in busing because gasoline prices are higher or something that is not part of our program. So that we're not supporting another organization or agency or board's programming with.
Yeah,
So when we allocate funds, we are always gonna ask them, tell us how you're gonna use the funds, and then report on the actual expenses. So in that process, we'll be able to say, tell us how these funds align with what we are funding.
got it.
So, staffing, mental health stuff is an issue everywhere. And, the organization I work for is understaffed. And we've been hiring, and it's been really hard to find people. Part of my concern, and this is more of a blanket concern, but I want to publicly state it, is that the pressures put on the frontline clinicians in organizations like this that we fund, because there's a tremendous need. There's limited availability of services, and are we making sure that we're caring for the people who are providing the services that we fund? Because if we're not, we're driving them out of the industry. And so they're underpaid, they're overworked, they have incredible quotas they have to meet. How are we ensuring that when we have this extra money, that it's actually going to help the people who are doing the frontline work? And I have inquired amongst people who have worked in some of these agencies, and when you have an unpaid intern running a group of children, 20 children by themselves, that is not mental health. That's not care. That is babysitting. And so I want to ensure that we're using the funds that we have available to actually like make a difference. And so again, this may be too complex to put into a single motion or to address in terms of the terms of how the way that these agencies are allowed to use the funds. But I really feel strongly that we need to make sure that we're carrying that because quite frankly, the people who are willing to stay in an industry that's underpaid and overworked are also the people who are okay providing substandard care. And that's not to impugn anyone's integrity or anything like that, but this is a big issue.
I think that, personally, when I would recommend that this be reused for employee retention, that's where they could hit those key employees that are actually making a difference. That would be my hope.
So I do want to weigh in on a couple of things though too, I'm sorry.
Yes, yes.
I thought you were, but I did. Two, one, if you know of somebody who's running a group with an intern of 20 people, I want to know about that because that's something that we'd have to address separately, okay?
I will inquire about it.
Right, because that's probably not to Ohio Mass standards, and I want to record say it's not Ohio Mass standards. So I'd want to know that, okay, in the context of that. Second, we need to be careful on how we characterize this because we have issues across our system that we fund that are outside of our control. We do not run agencies. Agencies have complex relationships with their employees. Some of them governed by collective bargaining agreements. That you just can't give one and you can't say this, you can't do that. So we need to be respectful of those entities and their agreements. We also need to be respectful of the administration because when I talk to our executive directors, they are as concerned with promoting quality employee relationships and retention as we are. And these funds could help that.
Certainly.
But each agency is gonna have to do that differently. So putting a motion in there to that effect, I think would be too constraining.
I agree with you, yeah. And I want to also state, like, I have not named anyone in particular or anything like that because I recognize the complexities of how the organizations run and the need and the funding issues, and I wasn't aware of collective bargaining units, but that certainly adds another layer to that.
Right.
So yeah.
This idea, Department of Medicaid did something similar to this based on 2020 claims for Medicaid to all the agencies that bill Medicaid. And the question came from the providers, treatment providers, are you going to match that? Because in our contract, there is language to reflect that we follow Medicaid's process, is the reading. We collectively said, it wouldn't be fair to just match that for treatment agencies and not extend that to the other organizations in our system of care, to include those support and prevention organizations. So that's where this idea kind of percolated from the city.
I think the reality is this is a one-time. We have no idea what's going to happen next year. So well-run organizations are not going to use this for salaries and ongoing things that would need to be sustainable. They're going to use it for their needs, whether it's to bonus people to try to retain them or put money into recruiting to get more people to fill the openings. So I think every agency is going to look at it differently, but I think the well-run agencies will figure out that this is a one-time thing and to get the most bang for their buck, I would hope.
And we expect that our purchase of service underspending, though it's not gonna equal this amount of money, it's a substantial amount of money. So this is not an allocation of $1 million of new money. There's a portion of this that we have decided to allocate for this fiscal year that just isn't going to get spent. So, and Jenny, that dollar.
Actually, I'm thinking we're probably gonna be underspent by about $1.5 million.
Really? So really, this is money that, this in essence is less money than what we will be underspent by on the POS line item?
No, in total.
In total, in
expenses.
total, okay.
POS is probably about 400,000.
400,000, that's what I thought that was.
But I'll have an idea for the rest of that.
Of course you will.
Come July or August.
So from a funding perspective, when you talk saying you're in charge of things, what part of town are you in charge of?
These are all local levy dollars.
But the hope would be that an agency that's underspending because they don't have enough staff to provide those services can use some of this money to recruit people, and next year we'll see less underspending because they will have the staff to provide the services that we will want to reimburse them for. I mean, I think that's the thought process.
Yes.
Yeah. Second.
Any other questions?
Who gets to make those phone calls to tell them?
Oh, I see, it's already out.
Oh, yeah, oops, never mind. How exciting.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
So, I need a second. Oh,
Second.
Oh, sorry, thank you, sorry. Okay, so again, those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? Anyone abstaining? Okay, motion passes. All right, next one, Amy.
I am on the health officer designation, which is on page 16. Just real quick, we only have one renewal applicant. It is a clinician at Unison, and she knows the page there. So there is a motion for her health officer designation.
So moved. Second.
Any questions? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? Those abstaining? Motion passes.
Before we go into executive session, do we want to do open session and maybe if you're comfortable, legal fees, or put legal fees up at the end of executive session?
I'm comfortable doing legal fees ahead and doing open session.
So why don't we do the legal fees first?
Yep.
And then we'll go into open session, and then we'll go into executive session so that people don't have to hang around. We might have another vote.
Yeah, exactly.
I would appreciate that if I were in the audience.
So page 17, as a result of the Rescue Mental Health and Addiction Services filing lawsuit in the United States District Court for Northwest Ohio District Northwest District Court for the Northern District of Ohio Western Division, we're recommending the following motion for the board to approve an agreement for legal representation from Frank Hickman and Associates for the amount not to exceed $50,000 and authorize the executive director to execute a contract for that purpose.
So moved. Second. Second.
All right, are there any other questions on that? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? Those abstaining?
Abstain.
Motion passes, and we're gonna move to open session. All right, Richard.
2 weeks ago, City Council did approve the facility for Unison at 5,044. That was the same day that we had the shooting in Texas. At the end of the meeting, they have their open session, and that's what everyone discussed. I stayed until the end of the meeting and thanked everyone that I could. Since then, that shooting has really dominated their meetings. They've had press conferences. It's been discussed widely. And I want to talk about that. We have the midterms coming up, and we're going to hear a lot of talk about mental illness and violence, but we're going to hear very little talk about the overwhelming majority of people with mental illness that live productive lives. The current thinking, I believe, started October of 2015, and that's when candidate Donald Trump, he was speaking in Nashville, Tennessee. There had just been a shooting at a college in Oregon where 9 people were killed, and Trump just whipped the crowd into a frenzy. He talked about his concealed carry permit back in New York. Anybody messes with me, they'll be in for a big surprise. The crowd just went crazy. And he continued that throughout his candidacy and into his presidency. He did try to get rid of the exclusion that would allow Medicaid to fund facilities of more than 16 beds, which is the way it was back when we had large mental institutions. He posed for photo opportunities at every opportunity with survivors of massacres. He really milked it for all it was worth, and we are probably going to hear a lot more of that going into the midterms, talk about mental illness and guns. So I just want to talk very, very briefly, and I acknowledge that there's so many mass shootings, you can't keep track of them all. We're coming up on the 10th anniversary of the mass shooting at a Colorado theater. This was done by James Holmes. He was a gifted student who had schizophrenia. He thought he was the Joker from the Batman movies, and he walked into a crowded Batman theater. He threw smoke grenades, and then he shot 82 people, 12 fatally and 70 injured. Now, what came out at his trial was very disturbing. As he stood in the parking lot, he was on the phone with a mental health facility, and it was disconnected after 9 seconds. They were never able to determine, did somebody hang up on him? Did he hang up? For whatever reason, it was used against him at his trial because his lawyers were arguing diminished capacity, and the prosecution was arguing no premeditation. And the fact that he called a mental health facility meant that he knew what he was doing was wrong, and he understood the difference between right and wrong, and he didn't meet the definition of insanity. And he was convicted and given a life sentence. Now, we not only have shootings, we have copycats, and here's one. A few days after that, this guy was named Neil Prescott, and he was in, I believe, Palmer Park, Maryland. He had just been fired from his job, and he had the exact same delusions that James Holmes had. He thought he was a Joker. So he called his place of employment twice, said, I'm the Joker, and I'm going to come in and kill everybody. Well, they knew who it was. They notified the police, and when they went to see him, he was wearing a T-shirt that said, guns don't kill people, I do. No, that's a red flag. And they found out he had rifles, he had guns, he had thousands of rounds of ammunition, all purchased legally, but they got to him first, and they transported him to a mental health facility. That's how it's supposed to work when you have coordination between criminal justice and mental health. So as we come up on the 1-year anniversary of rescue closing, I want to ask this board to take a hard look. Do we have everything in place to respond to an emergency similar to what happened in Texas? Because we know that there are disturbed people out there, and anybody can get a gun these days. And do we have the system in place at Zeph Center or wherever where we could respond promptly to that? So I'm asking the board to consider looking at crisis services, because over the next few months during the midterms, we are going to hear so much more about mental illness and guns, and very little about people living productive lives. So I'm asking this board to take a look at crisis services over the next few months. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else in open session?
I just have a couple announcements. We know that Ms. Howe and Mr. Tiggs are not here today, but today would be their last Programs and Services Committee meeting. They term out at their next board meeting. I just want to remind everybody of that. We will have, they both represent families, and they're Ohio Moss appointees. So we will be doing a recruitment effort for 2 new trustees. Also, and it's sadly that we have to announce that Ms. Cami Roth-Zarotniak has tendered her resignation effective June 17th. She's given us a couple of months to transition. So today is her actual last meeting with you. We just want to thank her for all her hard work.
Thank you, Cami. Where are you going? What are you doing?
I will be consulting and writing, and I have a life coaching practice that helps millennials. But for the most part, I would really like to focus
writing and policy work. But thank you, this has been an amazing opportunity, having worked in the private sector my whole life, coming to the public sector. It completely opened up my worldview, even though I had international clients in the market research sphere, working locally very much opened up my world in an amazing way. So thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you for sharing your gifts with us.
Wish you well.
So, motion to go into executive session, our attorneys are here.
Can I get a motion to go into,
So moved.
executive session?
For legal matters.
For legal matters.
So moved. Second.
Mr. Arnold?
Abstain.
Ms. Banks? Oh, sorry, it's not Ms. Banks, pardon. Ms. Bell? Mr. Brown? Ms. Carter? Oh, okay. I'm just gonna say yes, okay. Ms. Friedman? Mr. Janai?
Yes. I'm sorry.
Reverend Gordon?
Yes.
Ms. Harding?
Yes. What if you guys sit there?
Mr. O'Connor?
Yes.
Ms. Rodriguez?
Yes.
Dr. Russell?
Yes.
Mr. Stengel?
Yes.
And Major White? Yes. Thank you.
You do a vote.
Oh.
You can do a voice vote to come out of executive session.
No.
I moved.
Thank you.
And now, we're adjourned.
It's funny, but it really is.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.